Hi, welcome back. This is lesson 9, and this is about pain identities and how to help a person who's in a pain identity. So, Diane Hawkins of Restoration in Christ Ministries, she has fantastic teachings on the primary identities and how to minister to them, what they are. So, a lot of really good tools are on her site, and they're very affordable. So I highly recommend her information. Um, so, she talks about there are three primary identities: denial, and confusion, and pain. Confusion's job is to keep denial away from recognizing pain. And so, today I'm going to focus in on pain identities because when the person is operating out of a pain identity, it's hard. Everything's heavier, everything's harder, everything's more painful. When you go from denial and dip into the pain and then come back to denial to function, it's a whole lot easier than starting from a place of pain. When you start from a place of pain, it's painful. It's just everything hurts. Okay, so I wanted to talk about a little bit about denial because as you go through the healing process and as denial comes down, what happens then is your function goes up, but your awareness of danger is really helpful. So when people are in their um, the first part of healing, their denial will keep them denying that things are harmful, hurtful. They'll go back to abusers. They'll go back to places where they've been harmed. They'll go back to rituals and not even know it because denial keeps them denying that there's any kind of problem. And so they get their strength to function out of denying that there's any kind of problem. But what we're asking them to do is start to recognize that there are places and people that may not be what they thought they were. And that can be overwhelming and scary at first, but it's really necessary for them to become aware and still be able to function. And the way you do that is you go into the pain, you get resolution, you bring healing, and that brings strength so that they don't have to push away the reality of what's happening in order to function. They can function even though those things have happened, and they can make better decisions in the future about where to go, who to talk to, what actually is bringing harm. It just helps them. So today we're going to talk about when people are stuck in a pain identity. It takes some time to adjust to the idea of being dissociative. People have to learn how to regulate emotions instead of switch to another part to handle big emotions. They need to work together to give parts a voice to help uncover the conflicts that are fueling this dissociation. Because there are beliefs and conflicts that keep them separate, keep the identities separate. So we want to remind them that being a survivor doesn't negate the good that may have happened in their life. There's room for them to hold on to the positive, but allow for the things that they may have repressed. Now, will they make different decisions? Probably. But it doesn't mean they have to let go of everything and everyone that was connected to their lives. Remind them that suppressing memories is a normal brain function, and there isn't something wrong with their brain. It's working exactly how God intended it to work. Children don't really have a way out of the danger, so their brain has to create a sense of safety within their reality. So pain identities can be triggered by anything. It's not just pain that triggers a pain identity. It can be something good that triggers a pain identity. Pain can see potential pain anywhere it looks. The way that you know you're in a pain identity is sometimes your body can feel heavy. It could feel like you have a cold, like the same kind of sluggish, heavy feeling that you get when you're catching a cold or you have the flu. That can come over you when you have a pain identity. It's like a fog that can come over you. You could feel sluggish, more tired. You could just feel weepy or depressed. You could feel overwhelmed or just negative. You could be saying things inside your head. I feel terrible. Everything's terrible. Just you'll hear and think the same kinds of negative thoughts. If somebody tries to tell you something positive, you would say, "Oh, that's true, but you remember when this happened?" So pain always is grabbing onto the negative, and they have a hard time holding on to positive. People can be programmed actually to let go of positive memories, and they can actually be captured by demonic. There are certain demonic that have assignments to withhold the good memories that the person has so that they always live in pain because it's harder to function when you're in pain. Um, Pain identities can have a really hard time looking you in the eyes. So somebody can come in, they're in, like, let's say a denial identity or maybe a confusion identity. Um, and they'll be communicating with you, but as soon as they switch to a pain identity, they cannot look you in the eyes anymore. They'll be looking around, they'll be avoiding eye contact. So that's one tell of when somebody's in a pain identity. And when you try to encourage them, they will brush the encouragement aside, and they won't receive it typically. I mean, it's not always, but okay. So I wanted to give an example of how something good can trigger pain. As I was doing some healing and doing inner healing and learning about my story, but we were also still doing deliverances. My husband and I, we took training, we started a ministry, we started doing deliverances for people around the world on Skype. And this one lady was telling a story about she was driving down the highway and her car malfunctioned. And during the deliverance, the information came out that it was actually the enemy that caused this car malfunction. So she's traveling at a high rate of speed, and when the car malfunctioned, she was trying to gain control, and it started flipping the car, and she ended up going airborne and straight into a grove of trees. And she landed in the middle of the trees, and the emergency workers came. She wasn't harmed, but they looked at her car and they said, "How did you get in here?" Because even if you turn the car sideways, there wasn't enough room between the trees for her car to fit. They had no idea how her car got there. And the Lord said he bent the trees. Like he physically bent the trees so her car could go through on its side and land, and she was unscathed in that. She was supposed to have died, but the Lord intervened. And it should have been a story that increases your faith of what God can do. And it did. But afterwards, as I was processing that, I was thinking of all the deep sorrow that it brought up in me and the pain that I felt, because I thought, if you can bend the trees and you can intervene, why didn't you bend the trees in my childhood to intervene for what was going on for me? So when you have pain that comes up like that, you have to take it to the Lord and have him speak into it. You have to get a perspective that can transcend your emotions and the pain that it brings up. But it's hard because pain identities are the ones that have a really big time, a really hard time trusting God. So when I took that information to the Lord and I asked him to help me understand, like, I want to believe you're good. I want to believe that you're all powerful and all knowing and that you're on my side, and that you're going to come help me when I need your help. But I don't understand how you can bend trees for somebody and not for somebody else. So help me with this information. And so he told me that every time a child dissociates because of what is going on in their life, it is God himself coming down to earth and touching their brain to allow them to escape that pain. He said, every time a child dissociates away from what's going on, that is me bending the trees, like I'm bending their brain to allow room for them to stay sane. So he said, you have no idea how many trees I've bent for you. And he said it's like in a forest fire. When the firefighters um, are on the front line and the fire is blazing and it's going to start overwhelming them. For some reason, the fire shifts and it's coming at them. They have an emergency blanket that they wrap over themselves and they tuck down, and then the fire goes over them. It's like a silver blanket that repels fire. Um, it doesn't keep the heat away, it doesn't keep the noise and the emotional impact of it away, but it spares them. So when they come out of it, they can look around, assess the damage, and move on. So he said that's kind of like what dissociation does. That process, when the danger is past, typically when we're adults and we're no longer being completely dominated or accessed by the people around us, or when we have the ability to make different decisions about that, that's when the awareness starts to come. So, as children, out of necessity, we'll compartmentalize the pain so we can still function. But as adults in the healing process, when we start to feel the pain, so instead of avoiding it, we actually have to acknowledge it and feel it. And that can be really hard. When you've spent your life shoving the pain aside, it can be really hard to want to acknowledge it. So, what we want to tell them is you're not going to deal with all the pain all at once. We're going to take a little bit of pain. It's like putting your toe in the water and then coming back out. We're not going to like deep dive down to the bottom of your pain. We're going to just take a little bit and take it to Jesus and build that relationship between the person and Jesus so that they can start trusting He's for them, that He can heal this. So you want to go gradually. So we're learning how to navigate emotions instead of shove them aside, and we're learning how to work with the Lord to uncover the memories. And in the memory is going to be a conflict that has to be addressed because we form our beliefs out of these trauma places. So as we're learning to listen to the parts and communicate with them, and we can take what comes up and we can bring it to the Lord and we can find out what we believe. What did we decide? If this is true, what does it mean? Who does it feel like it makes us? What does that mean about God? Those are the kinds of things that keep the pain locked in place because all of those can be certain strongholds. So those are the kind of conflicts that have to be resolved in order to bring healing to that separation between the identities. Okay, I wanted to give an example of a session I did, and I have permission to share this. It was a session I did with someone when they came to the session in a pain identity. Now, she was farther along in her healing, so she didn't come not looking me in the eyes. We have a strong relationship of trust, so she knows that she can say whatever she needs to say, and that this is a safe place for her. So she came and we chatted a little bit about her week and about what went on. But one of the things that happened in her week that was really painful for her, she told a story. There was a neighbor. The mom was absent a lot, and it was kind of confusing for her. So um, she talked to the dad. He needed some help because the mom was gone, and so the daughter of this couple would stay with her and kind of be like a weekend daughter to their family because she would come over a lot and play, and she loved the little girl. But when she talked to the dad, she found out the mom was actually in a mental hospital because she started saying things like her dad wasn't her real dad, and the phones were attacking them and they needed to bury them, and just all kinds of things that, those are kind of clues that the mom has maybe some ritual stuff in her background. Like somebody who understands what can happen in rituals and how a person can believe things, they'll understand, oh, there's a lot of pain there that's not resolved. But the average person, when they hear those kinds of things, they're like, oh, wow, they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to classify it. So she ended up just checking herself into a mental hospital. So that was the story that was presented. There's a lot of points of pain along the way. Oh, one other thing was when the little girl was at her house and staying for the weekend, she got really attached to my client. And she started feeling abandoned when my client would need to take a shower. And um, she started calling her mommy. So there was so much that was going into this experience for her. And so rather than assume I knew what the pain was, um, what the conflict brought up for her, I just asked her what part of that seemed distressing, the most distressing. And what she said was the fact that the little girl called her mommy because it triggered a place in her, a wound in her, where she remembered not having a positive connection with her mom because she'd come from an abusive household, but it was also religiously abusive. There was just all kinds of abuse. And so she started talking about how she started fantasizing. When she would go to an aunt's house and the aunt was kind to her children, she'd start fantasizing about having a kind mom and that the aunt was her mom. And that was her escape. Mentally, she would just fantasize of all the things that could be if she had a good mom. But the fantasy, it fell short because she was always the visitor in those places and she was never really the one who belonged. And what she realized is that she had a mom shaped hole in her attachment story. There was lack and there was cruelty, but there was also the need of what she did not get. And the mistrust of all of this was kind of rooted in God and in lack because she was thinking, why am I not worthy of love and kindness? I'm a good kid. I don't want anybody to be hurt. I'm trying everything I know and yet I can't be loved. So she ended up feeling like an outsider in her own life. And there isn't anything that she could do to understand it. It felt spiritually and cosmically like she was the butt of a joke. And pain identities can often feel like they're the butt of a joke and God is the one just watching it happen, or even God is the one making it happen. Um, so the Holy Spirit told me to ask her, what did that mommy shaped hole get filled with? And she immediately said, death. Um, she felt like the good in life was never hers. It was never her right. It was never going to be hers. She wasn't going to have any family. She used to fantasize about having family, but it never came for her. So the reality of this, of not being able to be fixed, it made her choose the only way out of all this pain is death. And what happened was the fantasy collapsed and she was left with, it had distracted her for a while, but fantasies only work for so long. And then you run into logistics of how it just wouldn't solve the original problem. So I asked her, how old does this part of you feel? And she said it was 8. And so we talked with the 8-year-old a little bit, and I asked her, I said, can we come alongside this 8-year-old you? And can we try to understand what her life was like and what her reality was? So we did that for a while. And then we asked the little 8-year-old, where did this begin for you? And you never know what you're going to get when you go to those memories. I mean, you could go from that to boom into a ritual or wherever, but this went all the way back to the womb. When she was in the womb, there was a lot of domestic violence, and that's when death rituals were done over the mom, over her, connecting her to death. So she remembers not wanting to come out, not wanting to be born, and this is a spirit wound. But like anything that involves death or like a decision in the womb, typically I found that those are spirit wounds. And spirit wounds are where they anchor the really strong generational programming. The soul wounds are things that come later, and that's where they anchor the kind of programming that ends up being like Disney movies or fairy tales or stories of gods or things like that. But these death wounds and these spirit wounds, those are where they anchor the really strong generational programming. And I think this was infinity programming. That those are usually double binds, really strong double binds. You can find double binds that aren't infinity programming, but the ones that are really strong and they feel so overwhelming to the person, those are typically infinity programming. Okay, so the double bind that was in this program for her was when her mom was abusive. She was like, "I want to die to get away from you," but her mom had actually passed away. But she still felt like the mom was harassing her and causing a lot of pain. And so then the double bind is, even when I die, I can't get away from you. And so we had to work with the little girl who needed the mommy, who um, who had chosen to turn away. So the baby who had chosen to turn away. So we went from working with the 8-year-old. We we brought healing to her, and I asked the person, the client, I asked her, what would you want the 8-year-old you to know? And she said she wanted her to know that even though she didn't get what she needed when she was a child, and she didn't get the things that she imagined or wished for, that she could actually become the mom who loves and who gets to choose to love even in hard times and gets to give that kind of love to the children that the Lord has given her. And she told her, this age doesn't last forever. This pain doesn't last forever. There will come a time where she'll have the ability to choose. And it won't be fantasy for her. It won't be an escape. It'll be real. And she can be kind, and she can create a kind environment, the kind that she longed for. One of her biggest goals in life is just to live out of kindness. And she really values kindness. So she gets to choose to create that environment for herself and for everyone she comes in contact with. So we did some warfare praying, and we took authority over the trauma bonds, over the death rituals that happened, over the spirits that she was connected to, the spirit of death especially, over the programming, over the emotions. We separated her from any soul ties and any ancestral spirits guarding this claim over her life. It's really important when you're working with infinity programs that you deal with the ancestral spirits and the people who have passed on, or even the ones that are still alive that are working together to keep this person in bondage. So we prayed over that. And then we had the client and the little 8-year-old of her mentally go to where that baby is. And then we just spoke life over that baby, and we took authority over any kind of death or sorcery that would keep that little baby wrapped in that. And we just encouraged her to turn and choose life and come towards Christ and come towards the warmth of Christ and the light of Christ. And while we were praying that, the Lord was actually showing her that she had extremely beautiful fantasies, but those fell flat. But the reality of what he was creating and what he created inside of her, the kingdom of heaven that he dropped inside of her, was so far superior to any kind of fantasy that she would come up with. And from that place, she has a connection to her creator, and he could fill that mom shaped hole for her. So the spirit of death was removed, and then the spirit of the mom was removed. All the programming was removed, and the warmth and the light of Christ would come in, and she could physically feel the shift from the hollowness of fantasy to the reality of the kingdom of Christ in her. And she's different. I mean, that really changed. And the next session, She actually came to the session and said, "You know what I realized? I realized I'm lacking joy, and I need to really cultivate joy in my life. It's time for God to release the joy so I can operate out of that." So, dealing with that pain identity, um, and dealing with the root of it from the womb, because the younger you go with these memories, the closer you are to the core of the person. And when you can bring the healing down deep like that to the core of the person, these spirit wounds, um, it impacts so much of the system. So you can deal with parts that have pain stories, and that's good work because you're establishing a rapport with the client, but your goal is to get to the youngest possible place where that was started. And that shifted for her, and she recognized that she had been living out of a pain identity, and she was actually making choices to choose joy and coming up with ideas on how to create an environment that fostered joy in her life. And the switch from that was transformational. And it was just really powerful to see the work that Jesus does. When you take the presenting story that the person has, you go to the origin of that as young as you're able to reach, and then to see the transformation that comes out of that, because the spirit fills the emptiness of the pain that they carried. So when the Lord takes the pain away, the Holy Spirit comes in and fills that place, and they are able to move and operate in a different way. And that's the evidence of what the Spirit of God can do.